All right, so this time we are swift as well, just how you are swift with all the right kind of noise that you're making onto the platform. Let's make sure that we are engaged, we are participative, and it's time with that for the final, that's the closing keynote address of the day. It is time to reimagine energy with blockchain. Our speaker would be talking about the trust, the security, and the efficiency. And the fort of this very critical topic, I must say, would be held together by Julian Gray, VP Digital Science and Digital Innovation, BP. Hey, Julian, thank you so much for joining us, and here's handing it over to you.
Hello, my name is Julian Gray. I'm the VP of Digital Science and Digital Innovation at BP. What digital science is at BP, I'll explain, and I'll be talking to you for the next 15 or so minutes about our use of blockchain in the energy transition, our use and the use more generally or more broadly in our industry. But first, a couple of mentions about BP, because and the importance of why we're using technologies such as blockchain in the transition. So firstly, as a company, we're over 100 years old, and recently we changed our strategy to be from an integrated oil and gas company to an integrated energy company. And what that meant was a complete rewiring of the company to structure ourselves around three poles. One is resilient hydrocarbons. So we believe that hydrocarbons are still going to be needed for quite a long time during the transition. And the next is convenience and mobility. So that's thinking about consumers in a different way. And the last pillar is low carbon energy. And this is where things such as blockchain and technologies that combine with blockchain really are going to have a significant impact on the transition. And low carbon energy for us is made up of 5 transitional growth engines, which include bioenergy, hydrogen, renewable energy such as wind and solar, and then how you apply that to things such as the move towards electrification. So moving away from the internal combustion engine towards electrification. Again, all of these areas could be and are potentially impacted by blockchain. One of the way that we're going about this transition is through internally is to think about it in a set of aims. And the aims that we think about are how to reduce greenhouse gases, and I'll talk about that and how we're using blockchain with that. How we're being more transparent about what we do, and that's another area where blockchain is clearly has a role to play. And then we have 5 aims that we think about the think about people and how they interact with us. And again, we think there are interesting use cases and uses of blockchain in that area. And then lastly, we have a set of aims where we think about the planet, things such as biodiversity, how to conserve water, or how to think about circularity. And again, these are areas where there clearly could be reasons to use blockchain because of its nature in being both wholly transparent. It can be very much inclusive if you use things such as quadratic voting, or even or you can use it for traceability, which is one of the key uses that we see for the technology. So that's a little bit about the company and some of the areas that I'll talk about. What I'll do now is I'll explain what digital science is and digital innovation, the way we think about digital innovation, before jumping into exactly the part that this talk is about, which is the blockchain piece. So digital science in BP is our name for the long-range frontier innovation that we do. And we have both digital science and digital innovation in the company. And what we do is we marry these two things up, and that allows us to do long-range innovation, thinking about how technologies are going to impact the energy system, but then also do more short-term innovations that really impact the business right away. And the reason we do those two things is so that we don't miss on disruptors and technologies that if you only try to solve here and now problems, you don't see them coming in the future. And we do this by looking at somewhere in the region of 12 different technology themes. And for the last 4 years, one of those themes has been blockchain. The others, just for info, are things such as remote sensing, intelligence using AI and cognitive computing, or actually quantum computing through the next generation computing type thing, so how to optimize the world. And then we apply them to things such as low carbon and sustainability or consumer products. And we think about them, how to apply different technologies to our businesses, but not just for BP's business, it's also for externalizing or creating businesses. What I focus on now is what we do in blockchain and a little bit on decentralized finance. And we in BP, we have a sort of principles that we follow when we're thinking about blockchain and why we might need to use blockchain. And I think this is really important for industrials or the energy transition to think, where's the sweet spot that you can really make a difference? Because blockchain could be used for pretty much any use case, and there are literally hundreds of ideas that people have around blockchain. We in BP, we have a centre of expertise in blockchain. It's a small central team who have deeper expertise in things such as Ethereum and other blockchains, and they code, they write, and they go and they do thought leader pieces in the technology. But we hold to a certain set of principles internally about where we want to use blockchain projects. And the reason we do that is because, as I said, there are so many ideas. And at one point there were something in the region of 37 potential projects. And we looked at those projects and we said, well, are they really blockchain projects, or are they ideas that could be solved by a simpler, less complex technology? And so we apply principles. And our principles in BP for using blockchain are very simple. You need to use blockchain for highly complex value chains. So value chains where you have multiple parties, where the interaction between those parties could be completely changed by removing a central clearinghouse, say, or something like that. So that's principle one. Principle two is that we use blockchain for ecosystems where companies like BP have significant existing leverage. So the energy industry, for example. What would we do in the energy supply chain? And one example of this is a lot of people came to us and said, well, why don't you get into shipping and think about blockchain for shipping? We aren't the biggest shipping company in the world, far from it, in fact. And there are better companies to think about using blockchain in that area. And so Maersk and IBM are much better suited, say, to shipping versus the energy supply chain and all of the things that we might need on a platform. And that's so where do you have significant leverage is definitely one of the big pillars for us. The next is that there are complex data-rich problems. So it's about data, it's about the technology, and if you can simplify things, if you can make sense of all of that stuff, and also create transparency in it for yourself and for parties, then that's another area where we think that's really interesting. And then the last principle is really about decentralized finance. And we aren't a company who are getting into decentralized finance by any shape, but we are preparing ourselves for it. And by that, I mean, at some point, we're going to have consumers, perhaps nation states, and certainly partners who may want to pay in cryptocurrencies, probably stable coins, I've thought, rather than a Bitcoin or something, but we're certainly going to end up in a world where that's going to happen. I don't know when, that could be 2 years away, 3 years away, 10 years away, but we have to be prepared for that and understand the technologies that are used in that space so that we can accept all of that the day that it becomes more mainstream. So they're the principles we use for blockchain, and we hold every project to those principles. Saying, is the project we're about to run going to hold true to one of those principles? And if it does, then let's launch it and see how it works. So what I'll do now is I'll talk about 4 projects that are currently in various stages. They are either launched, well, in fact, they're all launched, and some of them we've externalized into new companies, and some of them we've held on to do ourselves. So the first of those talks about our complex partners piece. This is the Vact Consortium. And we created this maybe 2-3 years ago now, brought together 10 energy companies and said, okay, in the trading space, so blockchain at that time was very much used in finance, solely in finance, I'd say. But in the trading space, how do we clear all the transactions for the big trades that we do together in hydrocarbons? So we brought together a consortium, and then that consortium now is a company. We all invested in it, and it works as a clearinghouse for a private blockchain. And that's interesting because that allows transactions to have one source of the truth between the different companies, run on the blockchain, and everything gets cleared much more simply between the moment a trade gets done in our trading organization, say us with Mercuria or us with say Shell or something like that. The details of that trade get put in once, and it's shared on the blockchain, and all the parties get to see it in one go. The use case is very simple, and it solves a high bunch of challenges, which are a large number of challenges, such as the documentation that's required to do all of this just needs to be done once. Fewer chances of errors, and then actually on the value side, there are somewhere in the region of 30% of invoices don't get disputed because there's only one source of truth. So that's really interesting use case that we've had success with. Interesting about this particular project, it probably took as long to organize the consortium as it did to stand up the technology. And that's I think that's one of the interesting lessons about something like blockchain. We know the technology works, we know how it works. Getting people to the table and getting contracts organized around what you're doing is almost twice as hard as the blockchain itself. And it took us long to do those, to get trading, operations, contracts, legal, compliance, tax, you name it, all into the right method. So that's the first one. That's Vact. That's our trading. That runs in the trading organization. And another way we're using blockchain, I know this is a really significant use case, I believe. This is about the tracing of commodities from their source to their final use. And the way we describe these are certified commodities, or if you like, differentiated commodities. And we've already had some success doing this. And we've been measuring, for example, certain attributes of our gas estate. So wells, for example, in the US, or wells elsewhere in the world, where you measure the emissions from those wells, particularly methane emissions, but then as you measure them, you capture them, and you hold them and store them on a distributed ledger. And then you trace them from their moment of production all the way to our final use, which is when we hand them off, say, to a distribution company. Now, during that process, we measure clearly, and we have to measure. We measure how many emissions are coming out. Then we certify them using an external audit company, and then we store them on a blockchain ledger. And in the instance, we use a company called Expansive, who have a ledger for gas in this instance. But you could also do it for other commodities. Think about cobalt, or even food, or other things where you want to do provenance of the actual product. Anyway, once we've stored it, once we've got all that information together, we can then trade those certificates on the open market, and we can trade the gas at a price that is equivalent to its emissions in this case. But that could be, and we're talking about methane emissions, but that could be water, that could be any other elements that you want to say that your gas is differentiated against. So, for example, if you have a high emission, that gas perhaps has a lower value than if you have a low emission, which has a high value. So this is why we call it differentiation. And then you trade it in the open market, and that's all guaranteed by a blockchain ledger underneath. And that's a use case that I think is particularly interesting in the energy world, because it could be applied to oil, gas, power. You can even use it for charging EVs. Say, if you want to know whether your electrons came from a wind farm or they came from production from gas, and you decided that you only wanted renewable electrons in your car, it could all the way down to the end, and including, say, something like hydrogen, where you would be having either blue or green hydrogen. So blue being gas plus carbon capture and storage versus green hydrogen, which is electrolyzed hydrogen from renewable energy. So a really interesting use case, differentiated commodities using a blockchain to hold the different attributes of the commodity and how they are different in value. So that's the second one. Another area that we have worked on and think is absolutely ripe for blockchain and transition is the use of peer-to-peer energy trading by consumers. Now, the only thing I'll say about this one is I am absolutely convinced this is something that will be part of the energy transition in the future. But at the moment, there aren't really enough. There isn't enough legislation or flexibility in the power markets to allow it really to come to fruition in the way that we think it will in the future. Anyway, the idea here is that you produce your own solar energy at home, or wind energy, whatever it is, and then you can sell it to your neighbour or to a village, or you have a village with a solar installation, and they have excess energy and they might sell it to another village. So a very simple way of doing this is to use a blockchain and a distributed ledger to connect those people up and have the transactions as the energy flows trade between the different individuals. So you can imagine a world where, let's say, one village has a large solar installation, more than that village needs to use, and there are a number of villages around them that haven't got power sources or don't have enough power. That village could then trade the power to the next village, or even a house. You've got a set of solar panels on your roof, and you have excess power, and you can provide power to the people around you. Then the blockchain can be used to guarantee the transactions as you measure the energy from one home to the other home, and then pass the money directly through some form of tokenization from that home to the other one. And I think that's a really interesting use case. It's also one of the things that is game-changing in the distributed energy world, because as more and more solar gets installed across the world and more people are involved in the transition, it will create a really interesting flexible market. But I think that's a few years away. That's still maybe 2 or 3 years before there's enough solar power sort of in the world ready for that one to work. We tried it in the UK. We set up 250 homes, allowed them to do the trading. It works. It's a technology that's there. When you put the technology together, it was very, very interesting. It works very well, but needs the market to grow to a sufficiently to scale to the level that a company like BP would massively invest in something. The last area I'll mention is a project that we kicked off in the supply chain. I mentioned supply chain in our aims. We want to make sure our supply chain is both efficient and part of the transition, that it is low carbon. And so therefore we started with one of our partner companies, and we looked at how our supply chain worked with them for things like piping or other tech that goes into either one of our assets. So be that pipes for gas, pipes for oil, or turbine blades for wind turbines or something else. Anyway, when we looked at the supply chain, it was very complicated how the two companies were working. And we came to the realization that we could use a distributed platform to connect these two companies. And as the supply chain is optimize everything from the order point to the invoice point, and have everything happen sort of almost instantly as a product moves from, say, the mill where it's forged all the way to the moment that we use it on the ledger. And because that ledger is shared between the two companies in the first instance, but multiple companies in the future, then everything is transparent, everything becomes clear, and the moment that we use the product, we can invoice immediately. All of that has huge implications in terms of working capital, tax, and other areas to create a much more efficient supply chain. That product's called Argand. It's currently being launched as an external company, and the idea is that that will be, if you like, the marketplace for multiple products in the energy supply chain. So going back to our principles, can we have impact and leverage in an area, and is that why we should use this particular product? That's why we're using Argand. It's the energy supply chain. We're clearly a big player in that supply chain. We're talking with other energy companies about how that could also work for them, and that would be a massive breakthrough. And you know, the use of blockchain in a really clear and concise way. So I'll finish just in one last minute. Where's the future? Where are we looking next? So I mentioned it earlier, we're thinking about preparing BP for the use of decentralized finance. That's a really interesting area, and we're looking at things such as distributed autonomous organizations, how to use zero knowledge proofs so that we can share data and information without unveiling exactly what's there, self-sovereign identities, how do people interact with us while they still own their data, and quadratic voting. So is there a way where we could allow and enable people who interact with us to have a say in renewable projects, for example? So these are just thought pieces we're looking at. As I say, we're a future-facing organization, so when we've had some success with blockchain, definitely think it's got a role to play in this transition. But we're now thinking, well, what's next? What will we do once these projects do scale, and where we go next? And with that, thank you very much.
Julian, thank you very much for flying the skies virtually and joining us. Of course, some global thoughts, perspectives that arm us so much better, right? Thank you for rendering the keynote there. And with that, in the words of Warren Buffett, ladies and gentlemen, whom we know as an American business magnate, an investor and a philanthropist, he once said that in the world of business and technology, the rear view mirror is always clearer than the windshield ahead. Now, what he meant to say is that when we look ahead, our path may not be clear, but in the hindsight, it all seems so clear with regard to what could and what should have been done better, right? So we do hope that this summit acted in ways more than one, both as a windshield and also the rear view mirror, actually. Ladies and gentlemen, blockchain is revolutionary because it changes, as our speakers talked about throughout the days, right since morning, how it changes the flow of information and decentralizes it. We need to change the way we think to adopt this. Well, today the tech giants, the cutting edge startup folks, and the researchers from leading academic and advocacy institutions shared I would say, their heart out, their insights on the status of the current usage studies, where new opportunities are surfacing, those critical questions that we had in mind. They address the challenges that need to be addressed to move from the proof of concept to actually those real world implementation in the blockchain world. So I think together we tried to be as actionable along with you all, as you were also participative with those tweets that were flowing in, tidbits, and of course with all the insights that you gained at the booths. It's time that we say a hearty thank you to our wonderful partners. As you know, the Economic Times Blockchain Summit is co-powered by Antier, our knowledge partner ETH Insights, supporting association Maharashtra State Association Society, and Singapore FinTech Association, our media partner CIO Review India and Silicon India. The summit is brought to you, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, ET Unwired. And with that, thank you so very much to all of you for being a part at #ET Blockchain Summit. Along with my team, I'm going to wish all of you happy seasons greetings. And with that, goodbye for now. Thank you so much.